Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host with another marvelous video. This time, all monsters from Dead by Daylight explored. Dead by Daylight is a multiplayer 4 vs 1 horror game in which one player assumes the character of the ruthless killer, while the other 4 players take on the roles of survivors, attempting to flee the killer and avoid being captured, tortured, and killed. Survivors play in third person and have a greater sense of their surroundings. The killer is more focused on his victims and plays in first person. In each encounter, the survivor's goal is to leave the killing ground without being caught by the killer, which sounds easier than it is, especially since the landscape varies every time you play. There is no doubt that it is extremely exhilarating to dodge the killer in Dead by Daylight. The asymmetric online multiplayer game is nearly always at its best when you play as one of the game's numerous cold-blooded killers. There's nothing quite like stalking your prey and exploiting your abilities to make other players fear you. As a result, we've chosen to compile a list of the finest killers in the game that have the presence to haunt your thoughts and dreams long after you've logged out of the game. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Demogorgon. Stranger Things viewers will recognize the Demogorgon's menacing visage. The murderer's goal is to make the survivors' lives as tough as possible by making their escape much more difficult than usual. In November 1983, a predatory humanoid entity called the Demogorgon entered Hawkins, Indiana. The beast was created in the Upside Down, parallel dimension. A portal between dimensions emerged at the Hawkins National Laboratory when 11, a psychic test subject from the lab, made interdimensional contact with it. Hawkins was terrorized for a week after the beast passed through.
Demogorgon.
It kidnapped residents and transported them back to the Upside Down, where they were killed. The creature was finally defeated by 11. The Demogorgon's unusual skills allow it to travel the area swiftly and effectively, making it difficult for survivors to track it. The Demogorgon's talents are literally turned upside down. Shred allows the Demogorgon to jump forward with a scary slash in Of the Abyss, while Of the Abyss reveals survivors near killer portals. The Demogorgon can create portals that are invisible to everyone else if they're inactive, and they allow him to move across the Upside Down to another portal. This makes the Demogorgon a formidable character in the game, and you better watch your back. Michael Myers. Shape. We all know that Michael Myers is the main antagonist and central character in the Halloween franchise. Michael was sent to a psychiatric facility when he was 6 years old for the murder of his older sister, Judith Myers. After nearly 15 years in captivity, Myers escaped the asylum and spent the next 23 years hunting down and killing the rest of his family. He then pursues Laurie Strode and later her family in a plethora of movies that have since been released.
I killed the boogeyman. Get in there, come on, Tommy!
His character has gone through multiple changes and has often gone from being a serial killer to a killer with supernatural abilities because of how he seems to survive any and all attempts of assassination. In the game, he continues to be terrifying. If I saw that masked man coming behind me in real life or in a game, I'd be very, very scared. Michael Myers' particular ability is the Evil Within, a 3-phased ability that can be enhanced by stalking survivors. In the first stage of Evil Within, he has a drastically reduced panic radius, allowing you to approach the survivors before they notice you. His panic radius will become greater with each stage, but his vaulting speed and lunge will improve. This allows you to easily catch up to your opponents and deliver a killing blow. If you want to pay respect to your favorite slashers while playing, Myers is easily the greatest of the movie tie-in killers. Nemesis T-Type. Nemesis. The next assailant comes from the well-known Resident Evil action horror genre. The Nemesis T-Type was a series of bio-organic weapons that were being tested at the time. The Nemesis T-Types were created by Umbrella's Europe's No. 6 laboratory as the culmination of the Nemesis project with the successful implantation of NE parasites within T-103 hosts, giving Umbrella a highly intelligent and strong creature. Although several Nemesis T-Types were built, only one, the Nemesis TO2 is known to have seen battle. This person was assigned to Raccoon City and given the moniker Pursuer.
How is this fucker not dead yet?
Just no.
Jill Valentine was repeatedly confronted by the Nemesis, and while she managed to flee, he was never far behind. When a peculiar fog poured upon them, combined with the smoke of a city in disarray, he was almost certain he had his target. He seemed unconcerned by the phenomena, the bitter cold and low oxygen never presenting a harm to him. All that mattered was continuing the objective of finding stars, exterminating stars, and killing anyone who got in the way. The Nemesis is a ruthless killer that uses his tentacle to attack from a distance while being aided by zombies roaming the area. Lethal Pursuer Hysteria and Eruption are his particular perks, which allow him to quickly ambush survivors while damaging and hooking them. Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head, often known as the Red Pyramid Thing, is a humanoid creature from the Silent Hill franchise that originally appeared in Silent Hill 2. His red helmet and butcher's robes harken back to the town's ancient executioners who revered Valtiel, the Angel of Rebirth. He exists to keep James Sunderland human and help him recall his previous actions. He's a manifestation of James Sunderland's guilt and need for punishment. The Great Knife and the Great Spear, tools of James's inner suffering, are his hallmark weapons. This exceptional killer moved from one video game to the other and now features as one of the scariest killers in DBD. In Dead by Daylight, the Pyramid Head is known as the Executioner. The Pyramid Head is a nasty and ruthless executioner who is obsessed with inflicting pain as a form of punishment. The Executioner is a map manipulation killer who uses the perils he creates to punish survivors. Affected survivors will be vulnerable to his unique hook, the Cage of Atonement, as well as his unique Mori, Final Judgment. Forced Penance, Trail of Torment, and Deathbound are among his personal perks, allowing him to actively defend his prey while misleading and following survivors. Definitely keep an eye out for the Executioner in case he shows up to deliver his judgment. Freddy Krueger, Nightmare. Wes Craven's character, Frederick Charles Freddy Krueger, is the main antagonist of the slasher film series A Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger was a creature of nightmares for those who actually knew him even while he was alive. Freddy's true nature was hidden under a facade of warmth and friendliness, and only his victims knew what he was really like. When the victims' stories were finally heard, Springwood's parents tracked Freddy down and took matters into their own hands. They thought the fire had extinguished the monster that night and that their children were secure at last, but evil as powerful as him has a way of persisting. Years went by. The horror was forgotten, and the victims were mercifully forgotten too. But death doesn't want him, and he returned as the Nightmare Killer.
Much worse. The stuff nightmares are made of.
In the game, the Nightmare is a nightmare killer who attracts survivors to his dream world, where they are exposed to his dream abilities. With his dream projection ability, he can materialize anywhere on the map and apply pressure on survivors. Survivors will always be on the verge of falling asleep, and while there are means to prevent this, adopting these tactics slow them down. Instead of attempting to stay awake, they'll usually just wake themselves or others up if it's convenient. Nightmare is one of the most versatile murderers in DBD, with the ability to teleport to generators, snare and slow down survivors, and deceive victims with false pallets. Elliot Spencer, Pinhead. Pinhead, commonly known as the Hell Priest, is one of the Hellraiser franchise's most prolific Cenobites. Some see him as a demon, while others see him as an angel. Pinhead is an adventurer who explores the frontiers of experience, reveling in the never-ending thrills of pleasure and pain.
I am pain.
It was only a matter of time after the puzzle box known as the Lament configuration, which was a key to another dimension. It was discovered in the entity's realm before it fell into curious hands. He arrived once the door had been opened. Then followed a wave of blissful agony that washed across the entire realm. The Cenobite is a summoned killer who can wield chain projectiles and use the Lament configuration to torture all of the survivors at the same time. Deadlock, Hex, Plaything, and Scourge Hook, Gift of Pain, are his own perks, which allow him to delay the generator progression and continue to punish survivors who have tasted his sweet agony. He's definitely one of the most prolific killers in the game to have crossed over from the movies. Beware of his powers as you run from him and try to survive. Adiris, Plague. Adiris' story started off with her being left on the steps of the Temple of Purgation at the center of Babylon, where she was then taken in and brought up in a world of prayer and service. The priests of the temple performed purification rites, and when the plague broke out, she was also on the front lines, helping out. However, a time came when she was the only one capable and healthy enough to perform the rites, and she became the high priestess of Babylon. Unfortunately, that wasn't to last for long as she herself became sick, but she continued to serve, hoping God would save her. When that didn't happen, she banished herself from the city and went on to live in a cave with some of her followers. Sadly, all of them were infected with the plague, and they all died there in a cave full of vomit, blood, and pus. However, their bodies were never found. The plague has a handful of incredibly potent abilities, one of which is Vile Purge, which unleashes a torrent of infected vomit that with enough build-up can injure survivors. This vomit assault can also be employed as a trap, allowing you to use the contagious bile to blanket generators and barriers. While the plague isn't particularly good at any one technique, she is very good overall, and competent, knowledgeable players will have no issue dominating maps with constant damage output.
Full and heavy chainsaw which sank its teeth into countless victims. A suiting birthday gift to the cannibal.
Bubba Sawyer, Leatherface. Leatherface is one of the most popular killers to have ever graced our movie screens. Leatherface is from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, and through DVD, he has made the crossover from movies to video games. It's important to note that he is not supernatural in any way, and thus he is truly evil. He wears a mask constructed from a person's skin that he uses to display a personality, and he and his family commit murder and cannibalism. Tobe Hooper, the film's director, has indicated that Leatherface murders out of fear, not malice. Despite being the most recurring evil, he nonetheless follows directions from his elder relatives. Leatherface operates in a similar manner to another killer known as the Hillbilly, with a few noticeable variances that places him lower on this ranking. To begin with, his chainsaw attack can hit multiple targets, which means that if you can get a few survivors huddled together, you may rapidly eliminate them all. A nifty trick, but one you'll seldom get to utilize. In-game, you'll definitely hear the roar of the chainsaw, and it'll make you panic to no end. Frank, Julie, Susie, Joey, Legion. Frank, Julie, Susie, and Joey make up the Legion, and are one of the 26 terrifying killers currently featured in the video game Dead by Daylight. They were first introduced as the killer of Chapter 10, Darkness Among Us, a chapter which was released by DLC on 11th of December 2018. This gang has a history that goes quite far back. All of them were only teenagers when they met Frank, who was essentially an outcast. He became a terrible influence on the rest of them. He leads them in criminal activities such as vandalism. One day, all of their activities come to a head, and in an effort to vandalize a shop, Frank stabs the cleaner who was present there when he tries to stop them. He then urges the rest of them to finish the job. They take the body and decide to bury it, and this is where they transform from regular teenagers to a murdering Legion. In the game, the Legion are merciless killers and rush the surviving players in an attacking frenzy that can be very tough to dodge or evade. Their attacks also inflict lingering internal damage, and they're extremely brutal while transporting survivors to the hooks. However, many players consider the Legion to be the easiest killer to win the game against, as mastering their perks and being able to use them efficiently doesn't come easily. Kazan Yamaoka, Oni. Taking a katana from his father, Kazan, a young man, set out on a perilous journey to establish his value and purge Japan of imposters. Kazan slaughtered imposters in the hills and valleys, on the beaches and in the woods, disregarding the code he had been taught. The murders were heinous, vicious, and disturbing. His fury, hunger for blood, and twisted sense of honor had no bounds. Monks cursed him, believing he was possessed by something dark and otherworldly, while the noble lord began to refer to him as Rin Yamaoka, the enraged samurai, an insult to both Kazan and his family. He was determined to kill the lord, and in the process ended up killing his own father. When he did kill the Lord, he was attacked by a mob and then left to die, after which his body and katana disappeared, leaving him a vengeful Oni spirit. This killer has a greater view of the battlefield in front of him than other killers, and catching survivors pays off handsomely. If you're a survivor, don't underestimate his second form and try to avoid handing him the blood orbs he desires. Oni can absorb blood orbs from damaged enemies and activate Blood Fury, which gives him 2 additional abilities once he has absorbed enough. Demon Dash propels Omni ahead swiftly, and Demon Strike is an attack that immediately sends any healthy survivor into the dying state. Ji-Woon Hak, Trickster. The story of the Trickster is a dark and troubled one. Ji-Woon Hak had a meteoric rise to fame when he was discovered by a talent agent. He didn't come from a wealthy family, so it was great for him because he loved the finer things and all the attention and praise that was lathered on him. He became a member of a band with 4 other people, but soon he became jealous that the attention of the people was not solely on him. So when his band members were caught in a fire, he didn't rescue them, making him the lone survivor of a tragic incident and awakening the darkness inside him. He began kidnapping and torturing people, inflicting pain to create sounds which he considered exquisite. When his music sales dropped and the senior management threatened to stop him from self-producing his songs, he got them all in one room and tortured them to death while his agent watched. This moment birthed the villainous killer, Trickster. The Trickster is a ranged killer who can use his showstopper power to instantly unleash a flurry of blades. Starstruck, Hex, crowd control, and No Way Out are his particular perks, which allow him to quickly take down would-be rescuers and block portions of the environment to his advantage. The Trickster's primary weapon is the Polished Head Smasher, a personalized aluminium bat with a distinctive grip and a sharp edge. Anna, Huntress. The Huntress was once a young girl called Anna who had grown up in the wild, surviving and hunting with her mother. However, while hunting an elk, her mother died and Anna killed the elk to try and save her. This pushed her into surviving alone and mastering the art of the hunt. She went from killing small animals like squirrels to big prey like bears until she found her favorite thing to hunt: humans. She started hunting and killing the humans who passed through the forest, but she always brought little girls home to replicate the feeling of a loved one. Since the girls were kept captive, they would die, and that would make matters worse for Anna. It was not long before that she began raiding villages to look for little girls. She wore a hair mask, and that is how the legend of the Huntress was born. Thanks to her long-range throwing axe, which inflicts damage rapidly and efficiently, the Huntress is one of the finest Dead-by-Daylight killers. This makes her a fun character to learn because you can perform some slick takedowns and hit survivors who are separated from you by a window or a pallet. Her special abilities are also rather good, providing you with territorial awareness, the ability to unnerve survivors in order to force harsher and more lethal skill checks, and increased unpredictability while running. Evan MacMillan, Trapper. Evan MacMillan, who would later go on to be known as the Trapper, was a boy who loved and idolized his father. The family business was under his father's control and he learned everything from him. However, with age, his father's mental health also deteriorated. Evan became Archie MacMillan's enforcer when he finally snapped in what would be recognized as the most terrible mass murder in modern history. They never proved it, but it is said that Evan led more than 100 men into the dark tunnels before detonating the explosives and sealing their doom. The MacMillan estate story is one of wealth and power gone horribly wrong. It's unclear how many people died at the hands of the father and son. What happened to Evan MacMillan was never recorded. His father is another unsolved mystery, discovered starving and abandoned in the closed basement of his own business. The Trapper, like the Hag, can build traps, but he can also use them to incapacitate survivors, making the chore of tracking them down and impaling them on meat hooks much easier. The major issue with playing as the Trapper is that at lower levels he can only carry one trap at a time. In order to resupply, he must also locate and collect new bear traps. This is a process that takes much too long and adds yet more tasks to your already long to-do list when you should be searching for survivors. Philip Ojomo, Wraith. Philip Ojomo was an immigrant and he worked at Autohaven Wreckers. He worked on vehicles and ran the Crusher, which took a car and turned it into a small metallic cube. He noticed blood pouring from one of the uncrushed automobiles one day. As he opened the trunk, he discovered a young man who was gagged and had his hands tied, his eyes filled with fear. Ojomo freed the man, who made it 10 feet before being halted by Ojomo's employer, who slit his throat. As Ojomo pressed for answers, He was told that he'd been nothing more than a simple executioner because almost every car had a soul, and this was a service offered by the scrapyard. Ojomo went berserk. He tossed his boss into the crusher and waited for it to slowly compress. When the head poked out, Ojomo grabbed it and pulled the head and spine out of the corpse. Then he vanished, never to be seen again. Ojomo, as the Wraith, has the ability to become invisible in the game and thus is a stealth killer. However, every time it cloaks and uncloaks himself, a bell rings, alerting survivors to his presence. Predator, Bloodhound, and Shadowborn, his unique perks, offer him enhanced skills to hunt and identify survivors, making him a particularly effective hunter. He's all about locating and hunting survivors to make catching and killing them easier. Max Thompson Jr., Hillbilly. This unidentified boy was an unwanted child born to violent parents, the offspring of affluent landowners Max Thompson Sr. and Evelyn Thompson. He was isolated from society due to his hideous disfigurement. They locked their son in a room and fed him through a hole in the wall because they were ashamed of him. When the youngster managed to flee, he exacted a ruthless and heinous vengeance on the parents who had tormented him rather than raising him. He remained to reside on the farm after the deed was complete, wreaking havoc on the animals that were allowed to roam freely. He hunted and killed whatever he could find as he finally broke free from his bonds. They never found his parents' bodies, but he escaped that night, a deranged killer, out for blood. The Hillbilly is another top-tier killer and can cover a lot of territory rapidly with his chainsaw assault, which is perfect for pressuring survivors to keep moving and stay away from generators. The chainsaw also has various other advantages, such as the ability to break dropped pallets while sprinting and to instantly kill players with a single hit. If you can master the Hillbilly's toolset, you can make him one of the best Dead by Daylight killers. Sally Smithson, nurse. After the death of her husband, the only place Sally found work was the night shift in a mental asylum. The things that she saw there and the things that happened to her were horrible. She finally couldn't stand it any longer, and ideas of purification began to stir within her. When the morning crew arrived in September, they discovered over 50 lifeless patients in their beds, as well as 4 dead staff members. Sally was the only one who had made it through the night, but her mind was gone. Some of them were suffocated because they had marks around their necks. They managed to get her into an ambulance, but it never arrived at the hospital. It was discovered crashed in a neighboring wood, with all of the crew dead and Sally missing, creating the Nurse, an unrestrained killer. The Nurse is a terrible murderer with a blink ability that can render the player unconscious. She has the ability to shift large distances, allowing you to ambush players and score a crucial hit. She also has 3 tremendous bonuses that put the survivors at a significant disadvantage. For each injured or hooked player, Thanatophobia inflicts penalties to the player's sabotage, repair, and healing talents. The volume of the other player's respiration is increased by Strider. A Nurse's Calling, on the other hand, allows you to observe which players are healing within a specified radius. Lisa Sherwood, Hag. Lisa grew up in an idyllic village where nothing much happened, but one day she was caught in a massive storm in the woods and she fell down, hitting her head. While she was going in and out of consciousness, she was kidnapped by a group of cannibals who took her to their lair and stashed her. She watched as they ate the flesh off of her body and others, and while the others died, she somehow persisted. Even though you could see her bones and gangrene had set in, she was alive. One day she managed to remove her hands from the handcuffs that bound her, and with her blood drew a symbol her ancestors and village elders had taught her, and she chose revenge. Her body was never found, and she became the much-feared Hag. The Hag is a Dead by Daylight killer who uses traps and may draw traps on the floor. She can set up to 10 of them at once, with each one placed after the previous one has been removed. These traps are simple to set up and will cause a phantasm if one of the survivors comes too close. If this occurs, the Hag can quickly travel to the activated trap and attack. She is one of the greatest map-controlling Dead by Daylight killers. She can quickly disable generators, allowing you to hunt out survivors in a methodical manner. Herman Carter, Doctor. Herman was chosen for advanced neuroscience training at Larise Memorial Institute, a front for the CIA, a secret black site facility in in Illinois. Herman began using unusual and increasingly ruthless techniques to acquire information from the Institute's inmates. His extensive use of severe electroshock therapy yielded amazing results as well as serious national security concerns. No one ever questioned whether Herman had a medical certificate or what happened to the convicts after they had given over their information, because he came to be known as the Doctor. The true horror was only uncovered after Larry's Memorial Institute had been silent for a week. Personnel, patients, and inmates were all discovered deceased with various forms of head trauma. All personnel and detainees' bodies were found, but Herman, the Dr. Carter, had vanished. The Doctor doesn't even need to look for survivors because his special ability allows him to switch to treatment mode, which causes other players inside his fear radius to progressively become insane. This 3-stage status effect can force players to receive extra skill checks, scream loudly to betray their location, and witness hallucinations of the Doctor throughout the map. He can also deliver a more powerful electrical charge known as shock therapy, which increases a survivor's craziness and prevents them from interacting for a few seconds. As a result, he's a very difficult killer to play against, as stealth is nearly non-existent. Danny Johnson, Ghostface. Danny Ghostface Johnson is a character from the Scream franchise. The mask is exactly the same, and Ghostface is a murdering psychopath that roams the streets of America. He committed not only the Roseville murders, but many such heinous acts all over. He takes immense pleasure and pride in his murderous acts and waits for them to be picked up by newspapers so that he can showcase his work of art for the entire world to see. It is his masked appearance that strikes incredible fear in the hearts of many.
The new killer is called the Ghostface.
His talents and perks disclose survivors and hinder victims from completing their missions. When Ghostface uses his Night Shroud ability, he becomes untraceable. However, survivors can disclose his location by simply glancing in his direction for a few seconds. Stalk and Crouch increase his elusiveness on the battlefield and help him track his foes. The I'm All Ears perk grants Ghostface the ability to view the aura of any survivor performing hasty actions within a vast radius. When Ghostface picks up a survivor, his second personal perk, Thrilling Tremors, kicks in and disables all generators that aren't being repaired. Finally, Furtive Chase, an obsessive perk, is available. Jeffrey Hawk, Clown. Like many killers that have come before him, Jeffrey Hawk was also once a young boy who had a tough childhood. He resorted to drugging and killing small animals ranging from birds to cats and dogs, but one day he killed a man. His father found out and he left home and joined a circus where he was taken in for his immense strength. It is in this circus that he started actively hunting and killing humans by dressing up and using makeup from the other circus people. With time, he donned the costume of the clown and truly became the Clown. However, he got caught and his victim escaped. Before the circus people could get their hands on him, he fled into the night and he has roamed the earth since. The Clown is a killer in Dead by Daylight who specializes in crowd control. He has the ability to toss potent tonics that damage the survivor's vision, slows their mobility, and makes them cough, betraying their location. He's a high-skill killer, but he's tough to utilize effectively owing to the fact that many players hurl tonics at random rather than choosing the optimal area to employ them. He'll have to conduct a pricey animation to create additional tonics after he's run out. When survivors are huddled together, as they are when trying to pull each other off meat hooks, these tonics are most effective. Caleb Quinn, Deathslinger. Caleb Quinn earned the name Deathslinger while he was in prison. He was a gifted mechanic and engineer. However, he had a dark side and many of his inventions were cruel devices meant for torture. He tried killing his employer when he learned that the patent to his devices had been sold, and that resulted in him getting locked up. In jail, he became friends with the prison warden and began making torture devices for him to use on the other inmates in exchange for food. The warden finally released him on the condition that he was to hunt and bring more criminals to the jail, so it would profit. The Hellshire Gang was born, but soon the jail was bought by Caleb's prior employer, and this enraged him. He killed both the warden and his old employer, making him a hellish deviant. Deathslinger lures survivors in with a harpoon. Survivors within the clear line of sight of the Deathslinger will be in danger, as he can quickly encircle you in a lethal hug. The harpoon, Death to Bayshore can be aimed down sights upon survivors. They'll be hauled in if it hits. Deathslinger's first personal perk, Gearhead, shows survivors fixing generators when triggered. When Deathslinger hooks his obsession, the entity activates Dead Man's Switch, and if other survivors stop fixing a generator before it's entirely fixed, the entity disables that generator until the Dead Man's Switch perk expires. Its final perks is Hex, Retribution. Talbot Grimes, Blight. Talbot Grimes was a gifted chemist. However, his bent of mind was unfortunately towards the dark side. He flourished in medical school in London, yet he never let go of his horrifying interests. He was recruited by the British East India Company, and he made such a chemical that reduced the amount of pain and tiredness workers felt while increasing their productivity. He was rewarded with his own personal lab where prisoners from the Opium Wars became his subjects. His drugs also had side effects such as driving people to insanity. However, he was kidnapped and left for dead by the people he had hurt with his medicines. He was nursed back to health in a monastery where he searched for the soul chemical, one that would grant humanity enlightenment. When he got close to it, the monks discarded him in a drug den where he went crazy as he wrote his calculations and theories from memory with his own blood, creating the Blight.
The new killer is the Blight.
The Blight is a dangerous killer who can dash forward at high speeds and carom off objects to hurt survivors with his power, Blighted Corruption. Dragon's Grip, Hex Blood Favor, and Hex Undying are his personal perks, which allow him to put powerful effects on generators, totems, and pallets. The Blight's primary weapon is the Bone Buster. It's a beautiful piece of jewelry that's been deliberately weighed to deliver an unexpectedly severe hit.
The new killers are the twins.
Victor and Charlotte Deshays, twins. Victor's lower torso was stuck to his sister's chest. His legs curled around her muscles and organs as the twins were born. He was much smaller than Charlotte, an extension of her body. This unusual birth of conjoined twins led to people believing that their mother was a witch, and they spent much of their childhood on the run. One fateful night, however, villagers found them, and after finding their mother guilty of witchcraft, they burnt her. The twins were sent off to a place where experiments were carried out on them. They narrowly escaped these people, but Victor died in the process, making Charlotte bitter and secluded. However, his corpse did not rot completely. In the end, Charlotte simply lived to protect her brother and would kill anyone who dared come near. The twins are a team of killers who can separate and hunt together thanks to their blood bond power. The twins have been given the ability to split from their shared body despite being forever tied by blood and trauma. They hunt together as brother and sister, posing a double threat to survivors. Their personal perks of Hoarder, Oppression, and Coup de Grace enable them to keep track of survivors' movements, obstruct their progress, and hunt more efficiently. The twins' primary weapon is the Blade of Marseille. Legends speak of a monster skulking the Marseille gutters with a dazzling blade in his hand. In actuality, Charlotte modified a battered sickle she took from a farmer's house. Carmina Mora, artist. Carmina lived through multiple tragedies in her life as she first lost her mother and then her little brother. She almost committed suicide, but was saved by a murder of crows, and since then, she started using her surrealist art to express herself and her grief. Her art gained traction, and soon she was contacted by a major company with links to dirty politicians to paint for them. She was determined to expose their corruption, but in the process, put herself in danger. She and some of her friends were forced into hiding, but people found her and her friends and kidnapped them. They cut off her tongue, but the crows came to her defense again. However, they killed everyone, including her friends, and the bringer of death, the artist, was born. The artist is a ranged assassin that can send forth dire crows around the map to reveal and assault survivors. Grim Embrace, Scourge Hook, Pain Resonance, and Hex Pentimento are her personal perks that allow her to disrupt survivor objectives, torment hooked survivors, and take advantage of shattered totems. The artist's primary weapon is a sharp palette blade. The palette knife she used to paint her murals was sharpened into a keen blade by the ridiculous edges of reality. Rin Yamaoka, Spirit. The Spirit was born after Rin passed away. but the story of how she died is a horrifying one. Her family was in a lot of financial trouble, with the burden on her father's shoulders as her mother was extremely ill. One day he got sacked from his job, and that was the last straw. He lost his sanity. Rin came home to her mother cut up in bits, and she realized that her father was responsible. Her father emerged and charged at her with his katana, wounding her again and again all over, not sparing her. Her wounds were fatal, but before she died, she swore revenge, and thus the spirit was born. The spirit is a bit of a mishmash. Yamaoka's haunting ability allows you to sprint after survivors swiftly, which is important for closing the gap. She also doesn't have a cooldown, so you can keep playing after she's through harassing individual survivors. She's good at harassing individuals, but fails to control a group. The spirit Yamaoka's haunting power has a major flaw. It makes survivors invisible while it's active, leaving you with little more than scratch scars and ambient clues to find your prey. You'll also emit a loud noise that will warn survivors. Amanda Young, Pig. Amanda Young was a troubled soul who had caused a slew of harm to herself and those around her throughout her life. That changed when she confronted Jigsaw's challenge and triumphed. She became loyal to Jigsaw's cause after deciding that her life was worth something, and she was ready to take over when he succumbed to cancer. She became dependent on her master, and he gave her another game, but unfortunately, she didn't pass this one and was shot. She bled out and looked through the eyes of a pig and somehow knew it wasn't the end. The pig, who first appeared in the Saw chapter DLC, can crouch and sneak up on unsuspecting opponents with her hidden blade, making her ideal for stealthier players. By crouching next to a dead survivor, she can also set up a reverse bear trap on them, which will activate unless the other survivors can discover the correct G in the Jigsaw boxes scattered throughout the game. Her special abilities allow you to observe generators that are regressing due to failed skill checks, reduce the respawn cooldown for broken meat hooks, and temporarily expose survivors who save others from being hooked. To put it another way, the pig has a knack for figuring out what the survivors are up to. And that concludes our list of all the current Dead by Daylight killers. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.